So today we have Dr. Steve Martin, and he will be speaking. His topic is, was that really a miracle? How the language of religion in everyday life harms us all. So in the last 2 years, Dr. Stephen Martin has become involved in the secular movement in many ways. He is a professor of rhetoric, which is persuasive communication. He studies social movements and the importance of the use of language, such as metaphors, including religious metaphors, in the shaping of our culture. His own small community, about 7,500 residents, he has become outspoken about separation of church and state issues and religion in public schools. He has spoken in front of school boards and written many letters to the local paper, and now he's got his debut at the Secular Student Alliance 2015 annual conference. So put your hands together for Dr. Stephen.
Thank you. That's really weird. No one calls me doctor or anything, so to hear my being introduced as Dr. Martin is a little bit odd to me. I tell my students to call me Steve. I know, when I got here I said Doc. So just call me Steve if you see me around, that's not a problem. So what I'm going to start off with today is just throwing out a few really common phrases that we hear every day. We're so inundated with them that we probably don't even think about them at all, really. In fact, even though most of you in the room probably are atheists or non-believers or agnostics, you probably say them quite often. I know I still do because I just can't beat them out of myself as hard as I might try. So you might hear your friends, or even you might say things like, I feel so blessed to have such good friends, or thank God my car has good brakes, or I would have crashed. Or John's a good guy, God love him, but sometimes he gets in the way more than he helps. Try to think of ways that you might say these same concepts, by the way, without having a theistic sort of a metaphor in there, in particular, God. God only knows where I left my cell phone yesterday. I'm going to pick on Greta for a moment. She was trying to get the microphone off yesterday, and she's like, good God. How many times do we say that? I heard someone else say Thor. Good Thor. I'm trying to make coffee the new God, so I'll say things like good coffee. I don't know if it'll catch on. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue the same, but you'll hear phrases like, that meeting was absolutely brutal, all hell broke loose. So they're not just God. God's not in all of these. There's all different kinds of ways. God forbid you actually get up and do something today. It's a miracle anyone survived that accident. How many times have we referred to the survivor of an accident as something being miraculous? I'll come back to that later on. And one thing occurred to me as I was coming along on the trip was that the God metaphor stuff, the theistic metaphor stuff, even actually crept into scientific language. The one place they really don't belong, right? We've discovered the God particle. Right? Boson-Higgs, right? Or we shouldn't mess around with genetics. We shouldn't study genetics because that's playing God. So even in the realm that you would least expect to hear and see religious types of metaphors, we've adopted that thinking. So when it really creeps into even the last place you'd expect it, the scientific study of things, we know that it's quite ubiquitous. So I want to give you a little bit of background before I get into the actual points that I want to make. As my introduction indicated, I've become quite outspoken atheist. That's a lot easier to do when you're in academia and you have tenure. In my community, I would never have outed myself as an atheist if I, say, worked at a local insurance agency or owned a business. No way. I would have kept all of that to myself. So I'm in a place where I can do that, and that's why I actually feel it's sort of my duty to speak about these things and be open about it. But I understand the risks that are involved. And part of what I'll be talking about is why that is so very risky, even to try to challenge some of these metaphorical concepts, in fact. So a lot of people, though, when I started to become kind of outspoken, and I'll admit I was a little bit of a jerk at first, you know, when you first discover that you really should be talking about these things because they really do matter, and people would say things like, oh, Steve, why don't you just let people believe whatever they want to believe? And I said, well, because they stopped letting me believe whatever I wanted to believe, and I feel like I've got to push back, right? But a lot of people said that to me for a long time, and there's a lot of obvious answers, I think, that we've covered over the last, today, tomorrow, and previous SSA conferences. Someone, I believe, later will be talking about the dangers of abstinence-only education, how religious thinking affects women's rights, things like women's reproductive choice. There's tons of reasons that we really do need to care, and I started looking at the list of speakers and what they were talking about in the secular community, and all the good topics were taken. So I wanted to talk about something I think that's a little bit more underlying all of this, actually, and that is the way that we talk about these things, even atheists, the way that we talk about these things. So people say things to me like, oh, you're just being so technical, stop calling out people for the language that they use. It's not that big of a deal if someone says, good God. Sorry, picking on her again a little bit. Yeah, I still say these things. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and my kids constantly, if they're excited or having fun or something, or they're shocked by something, it's, oh my God. It's so common, and I kind of cringe, but I don't try to beat it out of them. I suppose the more I discipline them about that, the more they probably say it, so I'm really cautious about that. But people that might say to me, well, it doesn't matter, it's just words. It's just words. Why do you care so much about that? And I want to make one key point, overarching, I'm going to make a lot more. Language does matter. It matters a lot. And if I didn't think that, I would have gotten a PhD in definitely the wrong field, so I have to say that language matters, but it really does. I disagree. Language matters quite a bit. And because our language matters in the way that we talk about things, we have to understand how that affects us. Now, I'm not quite as strong as some linguists suggest that our language actually determines reality. Linguistic determinism. I wouldn't quite go that far, but it absolutely affects the way that we think. The way we talk affects the way that we think. It limits our options. It predisposes us to think in certain ways. It encourages some ideas and discourages others. It silences. It has a lot of effects, and so we must be aware of that. So I want to make a couple of major claims, 3, about why the sort of ubiquity of religious language actually matters in some real tangible ways beyond just the way that we talk about things. The first, JT touched on a little bit. He touched on it more in a specific community, but I think it would apply to the whole country, perhaps to the whole world, is that the ubiquity of religious language, it surrounds all of us. Even atheists use it all the time, as I've mentioned. It normalizes religion, which of course marginalizes atheism and agnosticism or non-belief or whatever label we want to call it. And in short then, that significantly contributes to discrimination against the atheist and secular communities. And I'll give some examples of that later. The second argument that I want to make is that religious language removes responsibility and agency from human beings, even if we don't realize that it does. And the third thing that I'll talk about is how religious language contributes to a lack of critical thinking in society and causes many people, even atheists, I would argue, to completely misunderstand a lot of very important subjects. In particular, I'll use an example of evolution with that one. So how many times have you heard, you've probably all heard this before, how many times have you heard someone say, if you don't believe in God, why do you talk about God so much? Yeah, you've all heard that one a million times, right? I have. That's actually a line of religious apologetics, by the way, sort of that starts with tradition of René Descartes and goes through with Anselm, the precursor to the ontological defense of God. If you can even imagine a God, there must therefore be a God. And so when we use the word God and talk about God, people say, you do believe in it, otherwise you wouldn't use the word, of course, right? So that's just a good starting point for us to realize how important words are, because even if you talk about God, people automatically think that means you believe in God, which of course is ludicrous. We're saying if, we're using a conditional, of course. To get a little more theoretical, just for one brief moment, Aristotle argued that thought itself was metaphorical. So what he meant by that is that the way that our brains work, we can't even really think about one concept except in relation to other concepts. So that's going to be something fundamental that we can think about along the way here. That's why metaphorical language. And of course, I guess I pause here. I know I'm speaking at a conference with secular students, which is primarily atheists, although as I've learned, it's not just atheists here. Those of us who do not have a belief in a God obviously realize that any kind of God terminology is, of course, metaphorical. So I'm equating those. I realize that might exclude believers from what I'm talking about. So the first thing that I want to talk about then is how having religious language everywhere really contributes to a normalizing of religion. And I'll give you some examples of this. Now, this is something I don't recommend that you do, but I always look on various websites and look at news stories, and then I make the mistake of reading the comments. I know. It's research, so I kind of have to do it, but I used to have really low blood pressure, and not so much. So I'll give you an example. I think Liz talked about this just last night. There was an SSA group at Idaho State that fought hard to change the name from interfaith to interbelief. And I think that they got that right? That's an improvement. I don't know if that's exactly what I would call a group, but Interfaith certainly has a particular meaning to it, and it's exclusionary of those who don't have faith. And I'll talk later on about how faith as a term is sort of in misuse too, if we have time. But let's take a look at something that, I know it's been brought up a lot in the secular community, but look at just some really basic places where we see God where it really doesn't belong, right? We have God on our money. We've got God on the pledge. I fight my school on this all the time in my community. And if anybody challenges that, and I'm sure many of you have, right? In God we trust is not a good national motto. It's divisive. It's not inclusionary. And what you'll find out then is if you read stories about having God on the money, you'll get comments on discussion threads, and I'll just read a few really quickly. These are exactly as I found them. If atheists don't like God on the money, they should just leave the country. Oh, that's tame.
Real American.
We'll get in a sec. Yeah, there's some more. This nation was founded on Christian values, and atheists don't believe in Christ, so they are un-American. So just something simple like having God on the money, on our money, that's the kind of thinking that then also people have. And that's not shocking to you, I understand that. You may remember a few years back, American Atheists was fighting having a girder of 2 steel I-beams that is in the shape of a cross. I know, shocking, they actually build buildings that way. Kind of structurally sound that way, but... And American Atheists fought that, right? This was really big in the news, and here's a few of the comments that you can find on some of the threads about the stories. Here's my solution: kill that whole group, American Atheists are referring to. I'm so sick of people that pick and choose when they truly want to be American. They can go to hell. Oh wait, they will. There's a lot. I won't read a lot of them, but atheists have no rights in this country. A snail has more rights than atheists. I'm not sure why they picked snail, but I say throw them to the sharks and let them be eaten, just like Bin Laden. So one consequence of having this ubiquitous God, theistic language everywhere is that it really does contribute to the thinking, and you've probably had this conversation with people too, that there really is only freedom of religion in this country, not freedom from religion. And I've had these debates actually in some official forums where I try to explain that necessarily freedom of religion is freedom from religion, because if you have your freedom of your religion, then necessarily you're free from everybody else's, including non-religion and so forth. So they're the same thing, but it really contributes to the fact that atheism just is unacceptable completely. Or another wrong-headed belief can result from it, and it drives me quite crazy, maybe you as well. From a legal standpoint, I understand it, but the thinking that atheism is a religion, right? So putting it in a category as a religion, and I understand from a legal standpoint why that's kind of necessary from a, if you're actually arguing in front of the Supreme Court, you really kind of do have to act as though atheism is a religion, or it doesn't work very well. But you've all heard the various analogies about if bald is a hair color, then atheism is a religion, and so forth, right? Yeah, that's my favorite one, but I won't repeat it. No, I'm just kidding. So when we get this kind of notion that, atheism is just another religion, and then we also get the extension of that, which is it takes just as much faith to be an atheist, and then faith becomes an important key term, and you've heard that one before quite a bit too. Okay. I think that what I'd wrap that point up with by saying is that sometimes what this would result in is that it's become so normal, just so ubiquitous, that if we avoid the language of theism, in particular of Christianity in our particular country, that it actually does kind of ostracize us. I mean, I've definitely stopped, correcting anybody or calling out bless yous or anything like that. I've just learned that that's just not worth my time doing that. But I want us to think about that, though, when you say bless you when someone sneezes and so forth. And I do think ultimately what this contributes to is what you do find in various kinds of polls, which is that atheists are the least respected group in the country. And unless this has changed really recently, we were dead last on the person ever who would be allowed to be elected president.
It changed, we're second.
Oh, we're moving up in the world. Awesome.
It only changed because they added socialists to the list.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that explains things. Okay, the second main point that I would want to make then is that I think a lot of religious language, and again, even that atheists use, is that it really removes a lot of responsibility and agency from human beings. And I'll give you just a couple examples that will help you illustrate this. I said in the very beginning the phrase, I feel so blessed to have such good friends. Now, I have friends who are atheists who have said that exact sentence. I won't call them out by name, I'm picking on them a little bit. But then they realized what they said. You're not blessed to have good friends. That suggests that you didn't earn them, or that you're not a good person, that you don't help out your friends. You have good friends because you're a good person, and you did things to make good friends. So even atheists, I think, have been falling into this trap of thinking that things are completely beyond human control, and so forth. And I could argue that I believe that's a sort of offshoot of a lot of religious or theistic types of thinking. That might not be the only source, but it is a source. You may have heard many people thank God for surviving a surgery or an accident or something along those lines, right? Again, that removes human agency. Don't thank God. Thank the doctors. Thank the nurses. Thank the people who actually helped you. That might not be so much in the atheist community, but that's a very common. I mean, how many times have you heard an athlete or a famous person thank a deity of some kind for their success, right? It's a very, very common idea, and it does seep into the secular community, I would say. And the way that that happens is the kind of thinking that everything happens for a reason. I mean, how many times have you heard that? I got fired from your job. Oh, maybe it's a blessing in disguise, right? Really? Being unemployed is a blessing in disguise, if you say so. So it really sets up this notion that a lot of things are beyond our control. And I think that's dangerous thinking. The third argument that I would put forth is that when this religious language becomes very ubiquitous and creeps into the way that we talk about things, I think it actually hinders our ability to be good critical thinkers. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of this. My first one is just the notion of faith. And the way I would put this is that faith has completely hijacked morality. So people would say, oh, you just have to have faith. And we use faith, has the technical definition, which is belief without evidence, but then it's kind of gotten more common, and I would argue kind of a wrong definition of it, is that it's similar to saying confidence or trust. Like, I have faith in humanity. I have confidence in humanity. So it's become synonymous with those two words, but when you use it that way, you kind of give a lot of extra credence to religious thinking. So that's the one word I usually do kind of pick on people about. If they say faith but they actually mean trust, I'll say, do you mean that you trust him? Because that's based on evidence if you trust somebody, right? Why do you trust somebody? Because they haven't let you down in the past. But if you have faith in somebody, who knows? Maybe you don't even know who they are, really. So the word faith is one that I pick on quite a bit. So let's talk now about miracles. This is sort of what inspired my original thinking about a lot of this, is how often journalists refer to something as miraculous. The most common sort of trope of this is natural disaster strikes, a bunch of people die, a toddler and a cat survive, it's a miracle, right? Because God loves cats. I think. So we talk about just about everything as a miracle, even the least miraculous of things like reproducing. The real miracle is not getting someone pregnant when you're not There's really nothing miraculous about it if you understand science. Quite the opposite. But the one that was really humorous to me was I was watching, CNN's coverage of a tornado in Oklahoma. It's always Oklahoma. And some older gentleman had just had a garage sale or a rummage sale the day before, and he had a couple $100 that he put on the top of his microwave. Tornado wipes out the town. Microwave, $200, still there. It's a miracle. A miracle. You want to know what a miracle would be? If the $200 turned into $2 million, that's a miracle. Not bad. So you can look at examples, I won't go through these, but you've probably seen them all the time. Journalists are really guilty of this. They'll call the most mundane things miracles. I mean, statistically, there's probably going to be a survivor of just about every tragedy. It's not a miracle if one person survives. It might be a miracle, I suppose, if all of them survived or something, but at any rate, it's exactly the opposite. My final example to illustrate this, and this is something I started thinking about a long time ago, and then it was Bill Maher actually started calling attention to this on his show, which I was happy and sad about at the same time, because I'll never get credit, and he will. But Gallup poll always asks the following question. Do you believe in evolution? Okay, this one's a lot trickier, but this is religious language creeping into a secular topic, a scientific topic. Evolution's not about belief. Nobody asks if anybody, you've heard it before, believes in gravity, or believes in the speed of light is actually what it is, or anything of that nature. When we phrase the question, and if you do this, this is what I'll sort of point out to you as one example of where you can enact this when you interact with people perhaps who are believers. Don't ask them if they believe it. Because if you ask them if they believe it, you've just put the argument on their terms, you've framed the debate in religious terms, and you lost before you even started to debate them. And that's because the theistic and the language of religion crept into that and tricked you too, ultimately, because now you're thinking that way as if evolution is a matter of belief. Of course it's not. Do you understand evolution is what Gallup should ask. Do you understand it? Because when Gallup poll and other polls, or you or me, ask somebody if they believe in evolution, you just framed it on their terms as a theistic question, as a question of faith, essentially, if you believe it or not, and not as a question of science. So there's some real serious ways that this affects us in some real ways, and it's not just about language that doesn't matter. So if I think back to some of the questions and some of the phrases that I posed earlier on in the beginning, try to come up with some ways, just as you're thinking about these things. I've had a couple of groups come up with some of these. Try to think of some ways that you can say these phrases in different ways that don't buy into theistic thinking. It's kind of tough, actually, a lot of them are. Like, some of these cliches are so ingrained into the way that we talk about things that it's hard to not say, oh my God, or God love him, or God awful, or all of these phrases, the devil's in the details. I don't know, what does that even mean, actually, anyway? Look that one up once. There's an interesting history behind that phrase. But the next time that you're having a discussion with somebody about evolution or whatever, just say to them, it's not really about a matter of belief. And if someone says, oh, that's miraculous, ask them, is it really a miracle that the guy parachuting survived just because his parachute didn't open, or is that just really good luck? Thank you.